Good morning, Gamecock fans. Today is Monday, March 31st, the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Coffee with JC Shurburtt. This month has flown by. My goodness. I think we're on episode 53 of Coffee as well. It seems like they just kind of roll by, right? Good to be with you here on a Monday. Lots to talk about here today as we recap the weekend, as we do each and every Monday here on Coffee. First and foremost, news of the weekend. Hats off to Dawn Staley and her women's basketball program. Survived two 4-point games at Birmingham, 71-67 against Maryland, and then edged Duke 54-50. Low scoring game. Duke, a very good defensive team, but the Gamecocks pulled it out there at the end, and now they will go on to the Final Four to play the winner of Texas and TCU. I still think that the women's basketball committee did not do the tournament any favors, because most years you get chalk in the women's basketball tournament. The favorites usually advance. There's very few upsets and Cinderellas in the women's side. But and part of it's because it's geared. For years it was geared that way. I mean, Connecticut would play regionals, and they play at home, and then they play regionals in Hartford, or someplace like that. The Gamecocks have played Charlotte and Greenville and things. So I'm not saying it's rigged. I'm just saying that in the interest of attention and tickets and all that, they at times have kept teams close to them. Spokane, Washington, I have no idea how they landed on that with those teams in the bracket. But it's instead of like looking down the road and saying, hey, we usually get chalk in these situations, they basically set it up if Southern Cal beats UConn, which I don't know that they will with their best player out. I kind of think UConn will beat them, but we could have part four of the mighty big historic Big Ten rivalry between Southern Cal and UCLA on one side of the bracket, and then part four of Texas and South Carolina on the other. So needless to say, my butt's pulling for TCU and UConn tonight, just because I think a fourth time is a little bit. I mean, you may as well play a best of seven series. I don't get why. And Gino Ariema had some thoughts about the people that run women's basketball as well. I don't think they use a lot of common sense at times, especially with the way it's seeded. I don't like sending everybody to two sites. I think that causes you actually in some cases to have a regional like out in Spokane. Washington is nowhere near Los Angeles. I mean, it's way far north. You send everybody, 8 teams out there. Come on, do better. Anyway, so that's that. It is the I believe fifth straight Final Four for Dawn Staley and her program. They'll be hunting for their fourth national championship overall and second consecutive national championship. The Gamecocks have never won back-to-back national championships under Staley. That's one of the few things she has not accomplished at South Carolina. I think, you have folks out there in the fan base that love women's basketball, follow it closely like every other sport. You have folks that don't. It's just like baseball or men's basketball or whatever. Everybody kind of has their favorites, and then most everybody rallies around football at South Carolina. It's no different than any other SEC program or really college sports program. But I think regardless of the passion for it with the part of the fan base that's, doesn't follow the non-fams, I guess. And these folks aren't anti-women's basketball. It's just not, their favorite secondary sport behind football or favorite sport. And that's fine, because some people feel that way about baseball. Some people feel that way about men's basketball. So regardless, this is good for the University of South Carolina. Women's basketball gets more viewers now than ever. That equals dollars and revenue eventually. I know the program lost $5 million or so, according to some reporting by the state newspaper and also John Whittle. But there's a lot of value to it outside of cash. I remember when Jadeveon Clowney committed to South Carolina on Valentine's Day because it was such an exclusive window. Former AD Eric Hyman mentioned it was probably $13 million worth of free publicity for the program. I don't know that high. I mean, I guess, but I think that yeah, when you look at the free publicity for the Gamecocks and people knowing outside of South Carolina and the South who the South Carolina Gamecocks are, I think it helps. Winning is contagious, as we all know, and you want to win at everything. So, hats off to Dawn Staley. It's amazing what she's accomplished with the program, and it also could serve as an example for other sports. I think that it just shows you that the right things happen, and you can build a monster. You can build a monster at South Carolina, and this is definitely a monster. Women's sports continuing on. Nice win at LSU for the softball team. You lose 11-3 the first night. It's rain out on Saturday, and then the Gamecocks, lo and behold, go to extra innings and win 5-3 and then 4-1 to take the series in Baton Rouge. First time I think they said since 97. So, hey, maybe that's a good sign for football. Not to take away from the softball team's accomplishments, obviously, but the Gamecocks hadn't won in Baton Rouge since '94 in football. They got to go down there this year. So, forget that. That's kind of, it's a football show primarily, and we're going to get to that. But hats off to Ashley Chastain Woodard. She's an easy coach to pull for. This is an easy team to pull for. And softball's hard in the SEC, like everything else. I'm almost to the point where I'm sick of saying this league ... I mentioned that last week. It just kind of is what it is. But softball's another one of those sports that's just insanely hard. As good as the Gamecocks have done this year, they're 4-5 in the league. How about that? Now some other teams have played 12 conference games instead of the 9 the Gamecocks have. In softball, I think you take a rotation and do a non-conference series while the conference is going on. The Gamecocks, of course, played Texas Tech, a ranked team in Columbia last week or 2 weekends ago. So hats off to those girls on that team. There are a lot of newcomers, a lot of players from South Carolina. Obviously, Ashley Chastain Woodard is a Gamecock grad. Baseball took its lumps this weekend to number 1 Tennessee as expected. Saturday game really hurt. I thought maybe the stars would align for a minute, but that's an 0-for-4 week. And I'll just say this. There were some signs of life this weekend, unlike Arkansas. I thought the team battled. Bo Hollins, I thought, had a good weekend. There are a lot of guys that, played pretty well. But like in the 7-5 loss, and this is one of those that's baseball things. On Saturday, you had guys like Bo Hollins went 4-for-4, true freshman. Going to be a good one. The pitching was not that bad. They got to keep. Tennessee's going to hit home runs, and they certainly did. The go ahead home run from like a 174 hitter was probably one they'd like to have back. But Jarvis Evans is pitching pretty well right now for the Gamecocks. And I like Brandon Stone better out of the bullpen. But, Petrie and Hall, I think, won an offer. That's tough. Gamecocks got to have those guys at least get some hits. But, heck, that's baseball. Sometimes your big boppers big bop, and sometimes they don't. And so here's something for you baseball fans to kind of, we go back to the Oklahoma series, and everybody, Whittle, Bradford, all those guys, Stewart, have lamented that game 3 loss because that was an opportunity to take a series, right? So South Carolina's last 2 opponents on the diamond are a combined 16-2 in the SEC, Tennessee and Arkansas. The next 2, Mississippi State and Texas A&M, are a combined 2-16. So I don't know. I think the consensus is A&M's kind of like Arkansas basketball, men's basketball this past year, where they're very talented and just kind of piddling around. I don't know much about Mississippi State. It seems like after they won the national championship, they've fallen off to a certain extent out there. But the unfortunate part of it is Carolina's got to go to both of those places. It's unforgiving. It's kind of like, men's basketball where Early on, you get Auburn and Alabama at home. Those are going to be tough. But your road games are, Vandy and Mississippi State, where, if that was reversed, you expect to take an L down at the what they call the jungle. By the way, congratulations to Auburn for making it to another Final Four, Bruce Pearl. And over in Tuscaloosa, I don't know when Carolina will ever win down there again in men's basketball, regardless of how good Carolina is or Alabama is. Just seems like I guess they still have the parquet floor. I guess parquet floor does something to them. But you kind of look at it, and that's kind of how this baseball deal is. I mean, you got number one coming into your park. That's well and good. You want big series at home. You're going to play on the SEC. But Mississippi State probably and A&M, with the way A&M's playing, they're probably gettable if they come to Columbia. But Mississippi State baseball environment's probably one of the best in the country. Really, it certainly is, win or lose. And then A&M, they've created one at Bluebell. We call it Bluebell Park. It's a big, nice, massive, beautiful stadium out there, and they have just like the Aggies do in other sports, they have these different cheers, things like that. But so I don't know. We'll find out what the deal is. I think, as Whittle said, Whittle will be on the morning show later. If they can get to 5-10 in the league after the first half of the season, it sort of lightens up a little bit. And there are some signs. I'll say I'm not as down after this past weekend. I'm not claiming moral victories because, by God, they should have won. And there's some things they have to avoid, mainly, bad things happening at inopportune times, or is that baseball? All right, basketball recruiting, transfer portal over the weekend, some huge news. And I'm sorry for not leading with it, but coffee's a little different. We just try to get the recap of the weekend out of the way. So, in case you're coming back into town after a vacation, you kind of want to recap. That's what we do. But Lamont Paris, I think, had a huge, huge pickup in the portal. I'll be honest, I didn't have a lot of faith they would land this guy. Trayson Eaglestaff from North Dakota. He's 6'6", 190 pounds, shooting guard-ish guy. This is the type of guy I talk about. Carolina's not going to out-athlete anybody in the SEC, but they can out-basketball them. And this guy is a dangerous shooter. He's a scorer. He was on a not-so-good North Dakota Fighting Hawks team, but he put 40 on Alabama earlier this year in a way too close game. It was 97-90. Nate Oates schedules the Dakota teams or whatever. He was wanted by Gonzaga. Did I say that right, Kelvin Sampson? And Kansas and the University of Kentucky. Those programs are pretty doggone good. But he felt like, he would play at those other spots, but, he felt like he could really make more of an impact at South Carolina. I was kind of floored, to be honest, that they got this guy. Hats off to Lamont Paris, Kerry Rich. Sometimes bad things happen. You have bad seasons, and the key is, what are you going to do to fix it? And then even in sports, college sports, especially nowadays, if you try to fix it, there's no guarantee you're going to fix it. But at least you try and you do things that make sense. And that's what I'll look for, especially with transfer portal recruiting in all sports. Does this make sense? Is this guy a player that, makes bad decisions? That does the things that cost you games last year? And that's in basketball. Football, it's more about how big, fast, strong, productive, that kind of thing. But, with this basketball program in particular, I think it's about who is going to do the things the right way and who has the skill set to capitalize. Because honestly, if you run the offense all you want and you can make that extra pass all you want and you brick a layup or you're 1 for 20 from 3-point land, it's not going to work anyway. So you got to have the skill set to do it. But 18.9 points per game for North Dakota. and a guy that was pretty coveted in the transfer portal. A lot of big boppers, to use that term again and switch it to basketball, wanted him out of the transfer portal. So I think that's a player to get excited about. They're not finished. They still have more to go. Obviously, Colin Murray Boyle's decision looms. There's maybe some draft projections out there that don't have him going as high as a lottery pick. So, it all depends on what the NBA says and, whether or not he comes back. But you start adding pieces in place. And I think that's good. And in basketball, you don't have to have, uh, you know, 8 superstars. In fact, teams with 8 superstars or guys that could be superstars don't always win. That just doesn't happen because it's unless they're just special competitors and play like a team. I know the women's team does, but in men's basketball, it's you got to have role players. I mean, that's just all there is to it, and they'll get some role players and they'll get some guys that can really help. Now they didn't just get one player this past weekend. Christ Isandiko. Now, look, I didn't butcher that name. I do sometimes. I will say I got the correct pronunciation from watching the highlights on our YouTube page that are up now from CBS Sports from him at Providence and St. Joe's. And so I listened to what the pros said, and most of the time it was a Sandico. Some said Esendoko, but it was 80% Esandiko. So Christ Esandiko, a native of France. Carolina will be his third school. That happens nowadays. He's 7 tall, 7 feet tall, 290 pounds. That's a big guy. His stats at Providence were not all that great, less than 4 points a game, I think. But I went back and looked at his stat line for St. Joseph's, which they play good ball in the Atlantic 10. That was his first school. He got in the portal, went to Providence. Not sure what happened at Providence this year, but at St. Joe's as a freshman, 8.2 points per game, 5.7 rebounds, and shot in the mid 30s from three. I'm not a basketball talent evaluator per se, but you look at what he can do passing the basketball. He's really a good, skilled guy at making that pass. So I see where I see what the line of thinking is there with him, with Lamont Paris. And shoot, if he can just get back to the numbers he put up at St. Joe's, that would be a win. You gotta have somebody rebound the basketball and play inside, especially if Murray Bulls does not come back. So that's a good start as well. I mean, I think that's a guy that you can kind of get excited about, and we'll talk more about that on the show, in the morning show, and all that later. So I think these are two big pieces when you're talking about redoing the roster and putting yourself in a position to be competitive in the Southeastern Conference. So that's the deal there. SEC put 2 teams in the Final Four, by the way. Hats off to Florida as well. Florida will play Auburn in the Final Four. So, we'll see what ends up becoming of this transfer portal class for Lamont Paris. I think it's critical, obviously. Now got 6 newcomers because there's 4 coming in from the high school ranks, including Eli Ellis. And you think about how Eli Ellis plays, and you kind of think about the Eagle staff, and it's kind of exciting. Okay, those guys can fill it up, and they're very confident players. And I think that's very important in any sport as well. Want to remind everybody to help the NIL effort with regards to the transfer portal for men's basketball. Baseball's going to need some players. Football has a portal window coming up. By purchasing coffee and popcorn from GamecockCoffee.com. My understanding is if you've purchased that they're shipping out, and then the rest will ship on demand. I didn't really get an explanation as to why they waited, but it's probably the company we partner with, probably about getting it in circulation and all that good stuff. Also, check out our friends at Palmetto Golf and Belts. They're having a sale. It's palmettogolfing.com. All right, so football. I was reading on ESPN. I mentioned this. We mentioned it. We touched on it. Phil and I did last week, and my point was, it's list season. Everybody, ESPN, everybody's writing updates and lists. Oh, here's five guys to watch for here, and this is the best guy here, and this is the big time guy. This is the most important player, and this is what's weak, and that's all well and good. I mean, heck, man, sometimes I wish I could just sit there and write endless college football lists. That would be amazing. It's some level when I get kind of burnt out about doing this every day, which is not often. Sometimes it happens though. Uh, and then I think about it and I'm like, nah, just, probably rather not. So I like to read them and talk about them more. But I did notice this on ESPN that, I'm going to use this for a broader topic. They mentioned the strength of South Carolina would be their front seven. And the weakness was the interior of the offensive line. Throw the offensive line is out right now. We'll talk about that obviously a lot. And I want to talk about the front seven. And it said, well, this would be the strength of the team. And this kind of shows you more broadly why you have to beware of outside perception. Because you read through it and it's like, they got, Dylan Stewart back, and that's what they're clinging to, Dylan Stewart. And that's fine. That's a great starting point. We've talked about that. I'm pro Dylan Stewart. I'm pro front seven. But I don't know of another team that they would look at the front seven and say, you've lost every starter but one, and say that's the strength of the team. And I think it's because they just don't know. They're assuming based on probably recruiting rankings, because if you look at the recruiting rankings of a lot of the players that ultimately will start for South Carolina on the front seven, they're pretty high. I said the other day, the Gamecocks could start 2 5-stars and 2 4-stars, and all of them in the top 130 as high school recruits next season. Michael Goodwine was a top 100 player. Jalen Brown, top 125 player. Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy was a top 3 to 10 player. And then we know Dylan Stewart. Dylan Stewart ranked below. Yeah, don't get me started on how they put him at the lower end of the 5-stars. That's kind of mighty. That's ridiculous. I don't know how you can watch. I mean, maybe he didn't put on film the bend, the freaky things. Maybe he didn't put that on film. I don't know. The whole thing was, I don't know how much better he's going to get. Well, you can look at his before and after picture from the time he enrolled at South Carolina in January of 2024 to August of 2024 and see, well, at least physically, which is, the eyeball test is huge in evaluators when you evaluate talent in the high school level. And you look at how far he came physically. So there's a little bit of progress he could have made, right? Jeez, I think he can get even better this year. They may move him around a little bit. I'd like to see that. But, and then that's based on maybe not having somebody as good as Kyle Kennard on the other side, but, or not as good, productive. Not productive. Kyle Kennard was very productive. But, I mean, they lost Kyle Kennard. They lost Tonka Hemingway. They lost TJ Sanders. All those guys should be drafted. They lost Boogie Huntley. They lost DeAndre Jules. They lost Debo Williams. They lost Demetrius Knight Jr. They lost Bam Martin Scott. That's the whole front seven besides Dylan. So, and they mentioned Brian Thomas Jr., and I think they're looking at stats. But so let's use that as an example and kind of morph it into a bigger picture conversation. Just like last year when everybody picked Carolina 13th in the SEC, because they had to pick their favorite teams and the teams they've talked about all summer. And, you had an article out there where Arkansas's D-line was ranked. They had the top 10 D-lines in the SEC. I don't remember who wrote it. Top 10 D-lines in the SEC. And Arkansas was 10th, and everybody else was ahead of them, and Carolina was nowhere to be found. And midway through the season, Mike Morgan's like, this is the best D-line in the country and probably the best defense in the country. And that was Mike Morgan, who kind of calls it like he sees it. That wasn't any kind of spin. Of course, I don't believe I spin, but I'm kind of a one team guy in this venue. So obviously, you're going to get that perspective from me. But so things like that, you got to ignore from the negative end of things. But I'm going to tell you right now, don't get all overconfident about the positive end of things. I'm not raining on a parade. I'm just saying being realistic, because one thing that hurts with programs in general that are trying to knock down the door, and college football is a lot like getting into a party, like an exclusive party. I wrote an article about this during the Muschamp era. Gamecocks have to kick in the door at some point. They had to kick in, they kicked in the door a little bit under Spurrier. Ultimately, that's a team. The Gamecocks for 5 straight years, they could have been division champions 5 years in a row, and probably should have been, because a lot of those years, they were the best team in that division. They actually beat the champions of that division in 2011 and 2012 and 2013. Didn't win a single one of them. And 2 of those 3 games were on the road at their place. They beat Georgia at their place in 2011. They beat Missouri at their place in 2013. Both were wild games, don't get me wrong. It's not like they blew them out. But, in 2012, Carolina took Georgia to the woodshed. But because of scheduling, or I'm not even blaming scheduling. Because of games they lost, they shouldn't have, okay? And that happened. And that happened to Florida when Spurrier was there. And I'm not blaming him. Obviously, he's the greatest coach that's ever coached there until Beamer passes him. Beamer's about 57 wins away from tying him. So, I mean, he's the greatest coach ever at South Carolina. I miss the press conferences. I miss the swagger, the confidence, the humor, everything about him. I'm not a Steve Spurrier hater. I was critical of his staff that let him down. I was critical of sort of sometimes the carousel of play callers on offense. But there were things that were bad signs behind the scenes, erosion, if you will. And that's honest, but you'll find no greater fan of Steve Spurrier than me. I mean, I thought the world of him, but he did have some, he never had an undefeated season at Florida. So there would always be this one game. I mean, hey, Steve Spurrier, that's how it goes. Wish there'd have been an expanded playoff back then. I think if there'd been an expanded playoff since like 92, he probably would have more trophies than anybody in the history of college football, including Nick Saban and Bear Bryant. Because if you got him into a tournament situation, especially with those Gator teams, lights out. Because even if he lost to somebody in the regular season, like Florida State, he could come back and, figure it out. Especially post 96, when he went to the shotgun famously. He was getting sacked. They were trying to drop back. And D-lines got too good anyway. But the bottom line is, during the regular season, there'd be one he lost. And Carolina lost to Auburn, very average team in 2011. That cost them. They had that gauntlet where they had to go to LSU and Florida back-to-back in 2012 after beating Georgia. That sucked because it shouldn't have been that way. The Florida game traditionally was in November, but because Missouri and A&M came into the league, and just like this past, they threw the schedule together. And then 13, that loss to Tennessee was extremely costly. And then at 14, you don't blow 3 2-touchdown leads in the fourth quarter, and you go to Atlanta that year. And I don't think Carolina was that good of a team that year. But you just hold on. You have any kind of defense at all. And so you look at that time period, and you're like, well, Carolina, I don't know if they would have ever beaten Alabama or LSU or whoever the hell they would have played. Auburn in 2013 was probably a pretty good shot. From the West, if they'd have gone, and maybe they're the Buffalo Bills in the SEC championship game, but that's 5 times they're in Atlanta, and they only went once. And so it's fundamentally hard, no matter how good you are, no matter how good your coach is, to kick in the door. As far as college football is concerned, it's a club, and you're kind of waiting in line, and you kind of get up there, the bouncer kicks you out, big orange bouncer in Tennessee overalls, 2013. Ugh. Anyway, so Carolina's got to kick in the door, and sometimes my point with all that to the original point was it's a process. And yes, expectations are extremely high, and yes, there is a chance South Carolina is very good this year. There is a chance the front seven is the strength of the team. I mean, you do have folks out there that have said, "Hey, I go out on a limb. Carolina's going to be able to get more sacks this year than last year." That was a lot of sacks, right? And I've told you about the personnel. I like the personnel, but guess what? All these personnel updates and stuff out of practice and recruiting and evaluation, that's all well and good. But that's kind of to tell you guys and gals who's going to do the starting for South Carolina this year. The depth chart, the roster, we only have 12 guaranteed games in college football, right? Every single year. That's 12 game days. 13 if you get to a bowl. If you're very fortunate, you get more than that, more game days. That's why I like bowls, because I like game days. And there's too few of them, right? So for the other 352 to 353 days, what are we talking about? We're talking about roster. And there's no, and unfortunately, the NCAA used a lame excuse, turning down Fran Brown and Dion's idea of a Syracuse-Colorado joint practice, which would have been awesome. You don't get a look against anybody else. You don't get a look. I mean, you do in every other sport on earth and every other level of football, except Illinois high school football for some reason. And I don't understand why they don't ever scrimmage anybody else. But they get out and do 7-on-7 competitions and lineman challenges against other teams. College football, you're just working against yourself until you play a game. And so it's impossible to tell you how they're going to match up, when it gets real and how good they actually are. You can guess and be relatively accurate. I thought Carolina would be pretty good last year, but I looked like a horse's ass after the first game, didn't I? For a week, you got to own that. You got to wear it, right? So beware of I guess taking things and that are out there and both ways, getting too high or too low, because this sport is still a mystery. I mentioned a couple of times, Mississippi State has 51 new players. Their over-under total on FanDuel.com for next year is 3.5 wins. Oh, they could be bad. They got a tough schedule. Boy, I don't know who scheduled Arizona State for them out there, but Arizona State has to come to Starkville. That's going to be a little bit of culture shock for those guys, just to be honest. But they may win less than 3.5. But I don't know. I wouldn't bet on it because I don't know. There's 51 new players. Carolina's got 39. And there's no way to get a gauge. There's no secret scrimmage like there is in basketball. Of course, Gamecocks beat the crap out of NC State in their secret scrimmage this year and lost 20 games. So who knows? And I think the Final Four team got blown away by Virginia Tech in the secret scrimmage. So who knows? But no. And I want to talk more as we move along about this notion of combined practices, because there's a lot of different options, like the NFL does it. There's combined practices that you can do, which I'm in favor of. And the people that want to sit here and say they're going to steal our players, shut up. God, all right, look, if you have a combined practice with a program, no, here's what you do. You just make them sign an agreement that they won't poach, that they're not going to, and sue the butt crap out of them if they do. Problem solved. It's like a non-disclosure agreement legally. Jeez, use your brain. But most of these schools have law schools or lawyers, do it. Combined practice is a good idea. I like that because it gives the coaching staff a look, and it's real beneficial to both teams, I think. And, you can do some scrimmages, you can do some, one-on-ones, work like that. I like that idea. I also like the controlled scrimmage idea where you're out and you're playing, like a jamboree style where, okay, well, we're going to go good on good, 2-on-2, that kind of thing. I also like the exhibition game idea, especially in the spring or the summer, as an opportunity to raise money. I think another thing you could do is I mentioned 7-on-7 lineman challenge earlier. You do a 7-on-7 or a lineman challenge. Nobody's going to care if you win or lose because what's going to happen is if you do an exhibition game and let's say you're pretty evenly matched, or you're not, but you don't want to run up the score on, let's say you're playing Presbyterian or somebody. Say they do it that way. I personally think you need to go get somebody like Georgia Tech, and they're not on the schedule. They're not going to be on the schedule. You recruit against them a little bit, but they're right there in Atlanta, that kind of thing. But you can do it a lot of different ways. But let's say you're playing Presbyterian, and you got the scoreboard on, and you're up 13-0 or something because you're really just working kinks out like you are in the pros. But it's so new that our mindsets as college sports fans are going to revert towards results because we have so few results. We're hungry for results. I mentioned 12 games, 365 days a year. So we're hungry for results. So we're going to sit there and look for results, right? Let's say Carolina puts in their walk-ons. PC's walk-ons may be better than Carolina's. You wouldn't think it, but maybe. They throw, somebody slips and falls. They throw a touchdown pass. Some fourth team, fifth team quarterback throws a pick. They run it back. Scoreboard says 14-13 PC. How are you going to feel in April or June if, every other fan base on the internet, hey, they lost to PC. And that's going to be one of Ward Manuel's data points, right? So I don't know about the exhibition game, keeping score, all that good stuff. But what you could do, and maybe you could just not keep score. ASO soccer. I think you should use them as fundraisers too for NIL. Charge everybody $25. I'd be all over it. $25 is not expensive to watch a football game either. And do split it up. Sometimes you go there, maybe you split the pot. I personally think that's what they need to do for the NIT and maybe even bowl games moving forward is make those. We're going to put money in your NIL coffers for that, both individually and for the team. But nevertheless, I don't want to get off on that subject. So you can do exhibition. I think controlled scrimmage wise, you also could. I think that's more of a closed situation where you can work on different things. I think there's ways you could start giving these guys a look, especially if you're going to, have this expanded playoff. You have teams playing 16 games. I think that it's only, and you're about to move to where you're just going to fill up every SEC and Big Ten team schedule with tough competition. I think you got to start giving these guys a look, because if you want to have a great opening weekend, which they all do because they make money, and then it's a great one this year. And if you want to have things like a Big Ten SEC challenge, if you want to preserve rivalry games, if you want to go to 9 conference games in the SEC, you can't just throw everybody to the wolves. You're going to get a skewed bunch of data points or a skewed result. You're going to get teams. It's just going to be unfair. And there's a lot of rules in college football that historically have been unfair. So when they change it to that, I think then we can probably start getting a beat on things, a little bit better. Well, this guy, scrimmage, he did this, looked like this, that kind of thing. But until then, just beware of overhype and because it's a long season once you get to the games as far as teams changing. It's a short season as far as how it feels, and it's a short season because there's not a lot of opportunity to play. But as far as how you look in your opener versus at the end, big difference between the Carolina team that played Old Dominion and the Carolina team that played Clemson. Big difference between that Alabama team that beat the snot out of Wisconsin on the road and that lost to Oklahoma 24-3 in November. Yeah, just a lot of big difference between the Ole Miss team that smacked everybody around and then lost at home to Kentucky, and then then the big difference between the Ole Miss team that beat Georgia and the one that lost at Florida. So it's it's one of those things where you can't get too high or too low, but if you let yourself have gigantic expectations, and I'm saying expectations, not hope, not excitement. Those are all different emotions. Expectations. In other words, mandates. If we don't beat Virginia Tech by 38 points, we suck. And most of you, 99.9% of you are like that. You're not gonna sit there and get mad if you don't cover a 38-point spread in the opener against a Power 5 team that's going to come and try really hard to knock you off. Then the opposite of that is anything they do is expectations. I think they're going to be terrible. Blah 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 blah. Bottom's going to fall out. Whatever. And I think that's good to know, or a good approach to have, when you're talking about a program that has to kick in the door, because I'm going to tell you right now, it may not happen this year. It may. There's a chance. But right now, March 31st, 2025, I can't guarantee it. I'd be foolish to do it. There's a lot of folks out there that are going to predict that. It's going to be way different. This offseason, I think combined for Carolina and Clemson both, will be probably the most hyped since the Spurrier era, for sure. But also, I think you have to go back to like the off season between 87 and 88 when they're talking big things for both programs. And of course, 87, 88, Todd Ellis was mentioned in the Heisman race and all that good stuff. And dadgummit, in 88, both teams were kind of rolling. Gamecocks started 6-0, and then some things happened. The bottom fell out. Don't need to talk about that. So this is you have to go. I think in our state, it's an off season of expectations for sure, set on the outside. I'm just telling you, when I read things like the front seven is going to be a strength, and I'm like, well, it could be, but I don't, I don't know what the thought process is going in there and saying, oh yeah, we know that's. They lost everybody except one player. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing, but we'll see about all that. All right. Don't forget, Inside the Gamecocks, the morning show coming up. Whittle on all things. Going to touch on baseball, basketball, recruiting, all that good stuff. Phil and I will be along with the show after the morning show. I think Mike Morgan's in today with Jamie, but we'll see you then. Stay tuned to Chief Sports. Please like this page and subscribe and share and all that good stuff. This has been Coffee with JC Shurburtt. Holla at you soon.